let me get started because I know, let me check my watch. I know that a lot of you have a limited amount of time. Let me be clear that I will get my talk finished certainly within your 1 hour. The extra half hour is simply there if people have questions or want to go into certain issues. I'm just making myself available for that extra half hour, but you will get everything you need in the lunch hour that you have here. So thank you very much for joining me and for being members of GlobalPDX. I'm going to be talking to you today about connecting, influencing, and changing minds. I think we are all more aware. You know what? My nose has started running, so give me a break here. We are all aware as never before that there are different ways of communicating, and that if you want to be effective in this world, you have to learn to adapt to those different ways of communicating. As you can tell, looking at me, I'm a white woman. I was born to a middle-class family in Portland during the baby boom. My family on both sides was completely WASP. I've done one of those DNA tests, and it turns out that I am perhaps the whitest person that was ever born. And my family doesn't even have any immigrants. The most recent immigrants were from the 17th century. So I had a very specific way that I thought the whole world communicated.
But the thing that's going to put you ahead.
Okay. I don't know where that came from. Until I was 23, I thought the whole world operated in a very clear and simple way. When I was 23, I went to the UK to graduate school, and there I met my husband-to-be, whom now my husband of 40 some years, who was an international student from Korea. And obviously he grew up in an entirely different environment. My first really big communication shock was when he and I went out on a first date, and he pulled a packet of cigarettes out of his pocket, and as he did so, he said, "Do you mind if I smoke?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I've had 3 grandparents die of smoker-related illnesses. Yeah, I'd rather you not smoke." And he was just stopped in his tracks. I'm not sure how the relationship was able to go on from there. He was so shocked that I would answer, "Yes, I mind." Because as he later explained to me, I was asking you to be polite. You're not supposed to answer. And I said, "Well, I don't think it's very polite to ask a question if you're not interested in the answer." And we went back and forth on this. He says, "You should never say no to somebody." And I said, "But you asked me a question to which I could say yes or no." Well, that would have just been an individual conversation among 2 people, except that when we got married and went to Korea, he started regaling everyone with this story of how he had asked if I minded if he smoked, and I had replied yes. And I'd watch everyone just go, "Oh my God, she replied yes? You were just being polite. How could she be so rude?" So that was my first. In fact, my biggest communication shock actually was when we went from there. I went to graduate school, a little higher level of graduate school in the Boston area. And that's where I learned that it's actually an Oregon thing that we randomly talk to strangers, that we may be in the line at the grocery store and start talking to the people behind us, or in the restaurant saying, "Hey, that looks interesting. What are you eating?" That in other places like Boston, they think that you're going to mug them, and they get very upset when you just start talking to them. So that was the beginning of a lifetime of understanding that it became important to know how to talk in a way that the other party could hear. Since then, I've lived in 25 years overseas in 8 countries with 7 different languages. I've had to navigate national culture, organizational culture, and of course, race, gender, class expectations. Until recently, a lot of people like to claim that we are all alike. And sometimes students of mine will still say that we are all alike, or worse, they'll say that I am colorblind. I was very impressed listening to an African-American woman who was giving a talk a while back, who said, to claim that you are blind to my race and culture is not to see me. To claim that I am just like you is not to see me. And so I think we all understand that in this shrunken world, we're seeking to bring more people to the table. And so communication adaptation is no longer optional. So I have a presentation that I'm going to provide for you today. Let me get into that. Share screen. Now, when I give this come on, respond. When I give this presentation, I will no longer be able to see you at all. So if you have a question or a comment, feel free just to kind of start talking, and then I'll stop and we can go on from there, because I won't be able to see you raise your hand. All right, please respond, which you're not doing a good job of. Okay, there we go. So in any interaction, always, we are thinking about our own perspective, what we want, why we want it, and how we like to communicate. What we need to bear in mind is that that's not what the other party is thinking about. They're thinking about their own perspective, what they want, why they want it, and how they communicate. Just to give you an example from an international, a global example, I was giving I gave a series of talks in Sri Lanka to NGOs on how they could do a better job on fundraising. And that's when I had my business in Singapore. And a few months later, one of the groups who had been in the audience said they were coming through Singapore and could they come see me? Of course, I said yes. I didn't really know what they wanted. They came, they brought a laptop with them. They showed this presentation on their NGO and what they did. They provided educational after-school programs for young people. And when they got done, they said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I don't quite understand what you're asking." And they said, it turned out that they wanted me to donate money. They wanted me to donate based on their great belief that the product they were offering was something that I would be interested in. They tried to talk me into it when I said, well, that I'd have to think about it, that there were other things that I was already contributing to. They tried to talk me into it by telling me how really, really great their program is. When it became clear that I was in the middle of a busy office day and I had to get back to other things, they didn't respond at all to the fact that I was, kind of indicating that the meeting had to end. Everything they did was from their own point of view. This can be very common when it's something that you believe in a lot. Let's say you believe in the great importance of this after-school program for poor children. One tends to try and talk the other person into it by really, really convincing you how great that program is, without thinking that I may have other priorities. I may have other ways of time constraints and things like that. And so it was basically a complete failure. We don't want complete failures, which is why I'm talking to you today. Effective communication really starts from understanding the other party's perspective and way of communicating, and then connecting your thoughts to theirs. It takes time, but if the donor or the donee, the company, the people that you're working with are important, it is worth that amount of time that you put into it. There is no single way of getting your message across. And what I will be talking to you about is how important it is to adapt. It may simply be adapting to the way that other party communicates. If you spend a little time talking to them, you find out that there's someone who talks very quickly, wants to get straight to the point. Or maybe there's someone that wants to hear a lot of the background of things before they can move forward. They may be people, they may respond very well to stories about people or about human impacts or about feelings. They may also not be like that. They may be people who want to hear about what your outputs are going to be, what goals you and targets you intend to reach. Their approach might be one that is more analytical. If you try to make a feeling pitch to an analytical person, you're not going to be very successful, and vice versa. So it becomes very important to recall that the goal of communication is not to say what you have to say. It's not like a lot of programs will teach you that if you learn to speak in this way, you will always win. That is not true at all, because you are not speaking to identical people. The importance in communication is that you be able to get your message into someone else's mind so that they can embrace that message. So I'm going to be talking today about 5 steps to increasing the power of your message, stepping into the other party's shoes. And I've given a handout on that, which I think would be very helpful if you're looking at a very big donor that you're interested in getting. Going through that exercise on the handout, I think would be beneficial. We can talk about that more at the end of the talk. Stepping into their culture, adjusting to the current situation, which I think is very important in this time of COVID, even though we're thankfully reaching what appears to be the tail end. Encouraging openness, in other words, getting the other person to talk. The more they talk, the more they invest in whatever you are talking about, and into addressing their perspective. So let's start with stepping into the other party's shoes. You need to ask yourself key questions before you talk to anyone in which that conversation is very important to you or your company. How do they see themselves? I've had so many clients tell me, oh, you know, they're ridiculous, they're impossible, they're irrational. I can promise you right now that if I asked the other side to describe themselves, they would not say, well, I'm a ridiculous person. I see myself as being utterly irrational. That's not how they see themselves. You need to learn to respect the way that they see themselves. Very interestingly, I did a role play with an organization that I was a member of, in which they had an exercise that we were doing role plays of how do you talk to a potentially difficult donor. And the 2 sides picked different cards. And my issue was that I was trying to talk to someone who was a climate change denier. And this was an NGO that focused on climate issues. And the way that they portrayed the other person taking part in this role play, who was supposed to be the climate change denier, was as a complete idiot. It was like, well, I don't believe in that old crap about climate change. And finally, I stopped the role play. And I said, you're not representing another human being. And if you come from the point of view that that person is nothing but a complete idiot, then don't waste your time anymore. But that's not fair. Just because they don't believe in something that you believe in doesn't mean that they're stupid. It may mean that they got information that they believe, that you don't believe that information. But there are many areas in which you might be able to connect, even if they don't agree in that main area. And so we redid the role play, and this time someone else took the role and said, well, what I don't like about the climate change policy is I don't like the way the government tells us what to do, which opened the door for me to say, yeah, I can understand that. You know, one interesting thing about our organization is we never go in and tell people what to do. We only come in when we're invited by that community because they're looking for solutions that they don't have themselves. Everything is driven by them. And all at once, what we saw is a deep divide we could start finding areas where we could come together. Other questions that you can ask are, what are their values and priorities? In the example I just gave you, one of the values right there is that they wanted a level of independence. They put a high priority on that. What are they concerned about? They were concerned about being told what to do by a government, feeling they had no more control over their lives. And you know, as much as I think that probably everyone in this room would not agree with that person's position, nor would I do understand that in this world, which has become very complex, a lot of people are stressed out about feeling that they have less and less control. And so if you can learn to respect that level of stress and deal with that level of stress, rather than just writing them off as being irrational, you're in that much better of a position to be able to change their point of view. How do they see the situation? What might they object to? Sometimes the answer is they object to you. You're not the best spokesperson. I'll give you an example. I had one of my students from Portland State University. Again, this is when I had my business in Singapore, but I'd come out to PSU and teach a course in the summer and then go back. One of them came out because he was interested in getting a job in Singapore. He had tattoos all over his arms. He came into my office. My whole staff looked like they thought that I was, in this case, I was the one that was going to be mugged. And the fact is, if you are going to work in Japan or Korea or China or Singapore, tattoos are seen as being a sign that you're a gangster. And so you need to bear that in mind. You might be the person they object to. And at the very minimum, you might want to dress in a different way so that you will not be objected to. The same point of how responsive are they to me. It's very important that we start understanding that people have biases, including ourselves. And we may not always be comfortable with other people's biases, but I think we can begin by really reflecting on ourselves. So I'm going to give an example here that doesn't have to do completely with communication, but I think it's a very important one in coming to understand people's biases. So as I told you, my husband is an immigrant from Korea, and he came relatively late in life. He came when we got married. And I never really understood why, when there were certain racist incidents, he didn't say anything. I thought it was just his personality. He was the kind of guy that didn't want to make trouble. But in the era of COVID, they became more frequent. And I became furious. I was furious. I would lash back when someone would say something to him. He would not say anything. I would lash back. And finally, it dawned on me after all of these years that the reason it was so upsetting to me is because I wasn't raised hearing those kind of things. He went to a boarding school in England when he was 12 years old, and he grew up being called racist things. So for him, there was no big surprise. For me, because of my own privilege that I never even thought of, it was a tremendous, shocking surprise. So one of the most important things that you can begin to do is understand your own bias, and that sometimes you think it's the right way to deal with things because you had a certain background. In the same way, you have to step into the other party's culture. Culture, we always think of national culture, looking at individualism, collectivism. I'll talk about those a little bit more, or high and low context communication. But you're also looking at regional differences, gender, race, generation, organization. There was a really interesting study that came out in July. It was reported on in the New York Times and NPR about African Americans' willingness to get certain medical treatment. They did this study. I can't remember the state that it took place in, but this involved men. They went to barbershops and got men to sign up for some free medical, physical. And within that physical, they could have blood tests or various weight, BMI, and so forth. When the people signed up, I'm just letting someone in, so just give me a second. When these men signed up, they originally gave them pictures of the doctor they would be dealing with. And next to the picture was a list of possible procedures that they would be willing to do, and they would tick those off. And at that point, they didn't see a big difference between whether it was a white doctor or a black doctor. Didn't seem to make much of a difference. But when they went into the actual physical, it started making a huge difference. And the willingness to do more invasive procedures, such as a blood test as opposed to a urine test, went up considerably when the doctor was African American, as they were. They were trying to figure out why the difference occurred, not when they saw the picture and knew there was a racial difference, but when they were in the actual physical talking to the doctor. And what they found was that the black doctors were talking to their patients differently. The white doctors were saying, facts. This is what you can do. You can have this test, this test, this test. This will show this will show that. Whereas the black doctors were asking about their families, were talking to them about themselves, were giving more of a context to their conversation, was making them feel that they were seen as human beings outside of being a patient. And the effect on that was, I think, as I recall, it was about a 61% greater willingness to get these procedures. So it shows that by being willing to step into the other person's culture and the other person's way of communicating can have really tremendous results. So I'm going to skip this slide. And most obvious differences to note in terms of national culture, obviously, is how fluent they may be in your language, whether that those people are formal or informal. Going back to the tattoo point that I mentioned earlier, if they're formal, they're just not going to listen to you if you come across dressed, in a very hipster kind of way. What are their rules of courtesy? In Korea, I learned when I was living there that it was considered very discourteous to cross your legs, I had absolutely no idea. But if you do that and the other party sees you as being discourteous, then you've got a problem. How impatient is the other side to get down to business? I was doing some work in Thailand with Siam Cement, and we had to go through 2 full meetings in which I had to fly out to Thailand and spend the day with them, having lunch with them, talking to them before they were really willing to get down to business. They needed to get to know me first. They needed to develop a sense of trust that I would not just take advantage of them. And then do they speak in a high or low context way? That is the wrong slide. Let me go forward. High context versus low context. In a high context culture, and I'll move backward and show you the previous slide, which will show you who those are. I apologize for these being out of order. We tend to think more in the way of I. In a low context culture, we think of I. In a high context, it becomes we. By the way, this is interesting, not just on a national level, but also on a gender level. Women tend to speak more, not absolutely, nothing is absolute, please, but we are more likely to speak in a high context way. Women are more likely to give credit to the group. Males are more likely to speak on an individual basis. Low context cultures, they will focus more on facts and conclusions. High context, that background is more essential to understanding things. You need to spend more time talking about the whole story, about how something was created. In a low context culture, we focus on goals as opposed to the relationships in the high context. In low context, we speak in a direct and linear way. I like to think of the American flag and how everything is in lines and points. And that's the points being the stars. And that's the way we think. We speak in lines. We speak in straight lines. We get to the point. Is there a point? We have a line of argument. Everything is direct, as opposed to in a high context culture. And I've been talking about Korea, so I'll stay there. If you've ever seen the Korean flag, it's a circle with kind of a swerving line in the middle of it. And that's pretty much how conversation works. You may talk to someone for a good 45 minutes before you understand what they wanted to talk to you about. But if you try to circumvent that and push it faster, you will never find out what it is that they wanted to talk about. In a low context culture, you speak the truth. In a high context, you seek to avoid embarrassment. When I was living in Malaysia, we would invite, my husband was ambassador, so we would have a lot of high level dinner parties, and you would invite Malaysians, they were Islamic Malaysians, to dinner. And in many cases, they would absolutely say, yes, we are coming, and then not show up. Now, this could make you frustrated until you understood that they weren't not coming because their goal was to insult you. They were not coming because they were seeking to avoid embarrassment. You've invited them to dinner, and you might even say, we can prepare halal food for you. But they're thinking, well, I don't know, if they don't have a halal cook, in fact, our cook was Chinese, the food wouldn't really be halal. If, just one second, letting someone in, letting someone else in. They may not have a prayer rug. So what would happen if I had to pray? Would I embarrass them? If I asked them if they had a prayer rug and they didn't, would I embarrass them if I said that I needed to pray and they weren't prepared for that? But I would also embarrass them if I said, no, I'm not coming, because they're asking me and they're trying to be nice. So I'll say, yes, I'm coming. So I don't embarrass them. But at the same time, I won't come, because to come would embarrass them. So my point being, just one second, everyone mute themselves, is that possible? That we put a very high value on speaking the truth. If you're not going to come, just say you're not going to come. But from the other point of view, that would be seen as embarrassing your host, as making them feel bad. And that was not what they wanted to do. We believe in open disagreement, and in high context cultures, they will do everything to avoid disagreement. In Indonesia, there is no word for no. You can say not yet, but you can't say no. Disagreement is considered a very unpleasant thing. I'm just moving up here if I can. It's going to let me do it. Let me try this. Let me try that. Well, it's not letting me at all. Just a second. I'm going to have to go out and come back in. Okay. Oh, boy. All right. I can handle this. I will not be outsmarted by my own computer. Well, yes, I will, but not today. All right. So the reason I'm giving you this is this comes from the work by a fellow named Geert Hofstede. I'm not going to spend a long time on it because we have more important things to talk about. But just to let you know, in terms of individualism, and individual countries are going to tend to be those low context countries as opposed to collectivistic. Americans are by far the most individualistic country in the world. Even Canada is 11 points beneath us. And that means that the way we speak is far more direct than other groups on the whole. If you look, everyone else there that I've put in, India, Mexico, China, West Africa, Korea, West Africa twice, sorry, is one of those was a specific country in West Africa, is below 50. India will often take a midpoint because it is kind of halfway between East and West. But if you notice, everyone else is significantly lower. So that is adjusting to culture. I put in this special slide on adjusting to the current situation because of the COVID era. It's good when you reach out to people to remind them that your organization still exists, but it's not good when they just feel that they're being barraged. And during a time when people are already stressed out, they can easily feel barraged. If you send too many things out to them and none of it is specifically relevant to them, they get in the mood of just deleting your emails when they come. Hard times are also not a good time to puff. By that, I mean that it's good to be positive, but don't overdo it. Don't say, we've had one of the best years ever. It's not a good time to say that when other people are not having one of the best years ever. You need to temper your message. You can give them good news, people like it, but don't make it so good that you feel you come across as out of touch. And don't offer things unless you can and will deliver. And by that, it might mean that, you know, if you think that you're going to be able to offer a full-time program next month, but you're not sure, it's not a good time to say that you will be. It's a good time to say that you're making every effort to, and that your hope is to, and that you'll keep them in touch. But don't promise what you can't deliver, because people are under stress. So if you have some, for example, very high donors who are important to you, spend more time, if you talk to them, on issues that are unrelated to their donation to you, unrelated even to the work that you do, but just connecting to them as human beings. You might ask and share stories on how you're managing. Ask them how they're managing. It's a good time to admit your vulnerability, to be able to say, yeah, things have been tough, but we're working hard. You always need to show that balance, but be willing to admit, this has been a really hard year for us. We haven't been able to do any trips to go out to visit our staff in the various countries, and we've missed that. People want to hear that you are in the same boat as they are. That's showing your whole self to create a connection. And be mindful, as I said earlier, of exhaustion, and don't overload them, and never, ever, ever make them feel guilty. I'm going to show you in the next slide an email, or a portion of an email I got from an organization that I had taken part of in the past. And I want you to think of how, if you received this, you would feel. For those who are on the phone, I'll read it. Dear friends, we missed you at our roundtable yesterday. As a strong supporter of ours in the past, we greatly value your engagement with our programs. You never let us down before, and right now we need you more than ever. Look forward to the next time we can connect, whether it be by phone, Zoom, or in person. And I would invite someone who is listening right now, if you could tell me how this email makes you feel.
A lot of pressure. The first thing I thought.
Yeah, what makes you feel pressure?
Like I had a responsibility that I maybe didn't even realize was a responsibility, and that regardless of whatever was happening in my life, that I disappointed someone deeply.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Sure, this is Kim. I am reading it as being rather passive aggressive. That what they're really saying is, you just let us down, and we need.
Yes. Even the first line, we missed you at our roundtable yesterday. It's like they were taking, like when a teacher takes roll, and they've noticed that you have an unexcused absence. And the fact is, something happened yesterday. I was busy. I was stressed out. And you're starting me out by saying I have failed, and that you were good in the past, but look at you now. It shocks me that this was an actual email that I received.
So it's interesting to me that all 4 sentences don't let up. It's 4 sentences all on the same kind of, you screwed up.
Yeah, the thing is, with the exclamation points, I think they think they're being positive. Look forward to the next time we can connect. Like, all I want to do is hide from you at this point, and then all the ways they can come after you.
It's all about us and nothing about you.
Exactly. But yet I got this from a bona fide organization who, if I told you who it was, you would know. So thank you. Moving on, we need to look at encouraging openness, and that is smiling, making eye contact with people. I work with people all over the world, and I've never come across anyone who did not feel it was important to smile and make eye contact. The levels may be different. In certain cultures, Russian, Korean, you smile less. In Thailand, you smile more. But everyone believed that that was important. The eye contact thing was really important. What was interesting is that eye contact, making eye contact, didn't seem to have any universal meaning, but not making eye contact was seen as negative by everyone. Some, I would ask people, what does it mean if you don't make eye contact? And I would get answers from they don't like you, to they're lying to you, to they're afraid, to they're sneaky. It was always negative. So it's quite important that you smile and make eye contact, depending on the culture. You don't overdo it in some. It's also very important that you appear confident and positive, as I said, not overdoing it. But the importance of being confident is, remember, especially for those of you who are asking for money, you have to give confidence to the person that you're asking from that you will be able to manage that money, that you know what you're doing, that it's not just going down a rabbit hole. So that's why it's really important. You're imparting that confidence to them. If you give money, your money will be used in a good way. You want to be respectful, friendly, and non-confrontational. And really, really important is you need to stop selling and invite the other party's thoughts rather than pushing your own. What I mean by that is we're seeking to get the other party to buy in. We're seeking to get them to take ownership. The more they can tell us what they think, instead of my telling you what I think, the more they are buying into this conversation and ultimately the goal that we're working on together. And then I underline, because I'm going to talk about this, these are really important steps, using positive language and asking open questions. So this is positive language. And it is incredible how well this works. If you guys come away with nothing from this talk, please come away from this point. And that is how you can turn a person's mind by using positive language. So she starts by thinking, there's no way we'll have all the data by next week. It is negative, and so she's going to rephrase it. We can have the data by 3 of the 5 divisions by next week. It's making you feel less hopeless. It's making you feel like we're making progress. It's making you more willing to move rather than to give up. Even more important, and one I use all the time, he's thinking, what's wrong with this plan? Now, I want to take you all to this point. If someone says to you, we can't do that, we can't do that, what is your most natural response? Why? Right? Why? Or why not? We can't do that. Why? Why not? If you ask the question that way, their brain starts moving to why we can't do it. Their brain starts moving to what's wrong with this plan. Their brain starts moving to, even their mouth starts moving to why we can't do this or what's wrong with this plan. And as I explain more and more why we can't or what's wrong, I not only become psychologically more invested in why we can't and what's wrong, but my face gets involved because I've now stated why we can't do it and what's wrong. So what we want to do is turn them into a positive direction. So in this, he changes what's wrong with this plan to what's needed to make it work as you would like. Same thing. We can't do that. How could we change it so that it would be doable? What could we do to make it effective? What you're doing, what could be changed to make this work? What happens then is that other person's mind is actually sent in a different direction. to start problem solving what changes could be made to make it work. They start moving in a positive direction. If you can get them to talk about it, they can actually start talking in a more positive direction. I don't have any numbers that I can back this up with, but I can tell you that in my own experience and talking to other people who are top negotiators, this is a tactic that works tremendously. Even if I was talking to someone who negotiated in the United Nations, and he said, let's say a country comes up with 20 problems with this issue that we've raised, I will find the one thing they didn't complain about and say, great, we're already making progress in such and such. Let's see where we can move forward in the other areas. So you are turning everyone into that positive direction. People like positive feelings, and they like being rewarded for positive feelings. So this is a really important technique. Also asking open questions. What are your main priorities? In the example I gave you right at the outset, I had this person say in this role play, yeah, I don't believe in climate change. Rather than saying, why not? You say, what are the ways you think we can best handle energy issues? Just get them talking about something they care about, and you listening to things that they care about. Get them to start seeing the world in a broad way, and you will eventually find something you can latch onto to creating a connection with that person. If we can provide extra resources, how quickly could you get us the data, as opposed to could you get it to us on Friday? What's standing in the way of getting this done? What could we do about that? What are your thoughts on this? I have to tell you, the last one is one of the most common questions I ask in any negotiation. What are your thoughts on this? When you ask people questions, you not only get answers and you not only get buy-in, but you've done something else, and that is that you have given them respect. Asking a person questions, giving them a sense of agency, is also giving them respect. We don't do that, for example, with very little children. We say, put your shoes on, put your gloves on. With adults, they do not like being spoken to that way. They don't like being told, this is the way we have to do it. So by inviting them in, you're making them feel more positively toward you in any case. It also encourages communication and information sharing. As I said, it shows an interest in them. And it reveals a lot in terms of preferences, concerns, and possible trade-offs. You need to address their perspective. Be interested in them. You gain influence. People like people who like them. As I said, ask questions. Show understanding and empathy. It doesn't have to mean you agree. It means you understood what they said. It means that you understand why they're coming from there, even if you don't think it's the right place to end up. Instead of pushing your thoughts, invite theirs and then build upon their thoughts. Adopt their terminology as much as possible. If people, one company that I worked for was a big consulting firm who they were having a lot of trouble working with a union of a major airline. They were trying to find out how they could create efficiencies. And the union just really blew them off. And I asked them to repeat to me what they had said. And they said, well, we were saying that we're coming in to look at the workflow operation to see where we can find efficiencies, that the management wants us to make this a more clean and lean production line. Everything they were saying was coming from management. All the terms they were using were coming from management. And every one of them was setting off just fear mechanism in these people's minds, because first of all, it didn't sound like the way they talked. And here are these people who might be like the union head, some fellow in his 50s, sees himself as a working class guy, and you have these young MBAs come in. Very often the the consultants are, young people in their 20s and 30s who seem to be talking down to them. They got just stonewalled as a result, because they were unable to speak in the way that the union people were speaking to them. The union people weren't talking about head counts. They were talking about jobs. So why not use the term jobs? They weren't talking about head counts again. They were talking about employees. Why not talk about employees? Why not use the language that the other party uses? Don't try to avoid other parties' concerns. Speak to those concerns. Be pretty much flat out right at the beginning. For example, if you have someone who is, for example, concerned that too much of the money of your organization is going to go to overheads, say right at the beginning, they've mentioned that in a previous meeting, and so you have another meeting with them and say, last time when we spoke, you mentioned you were concerned about overheads. So I brought some numbers to show you. That's showing that other party a lot of respect. Don't tell, but help them to see. Describe the issue. Don't say, that's not important, because they've already indicated to you that they think it's important. Don't say, don't worry about that, because nobody is going to say, oh, right, got it. Okay, from henceforth, I will not worry about that. And you want to reframe conflict into shared goals. I'm going to tell you a personal story, but it gives an example. This came from a student of mine at PSU who was taking my negotiation class. And at the end of each class, they have a requirement that they need to do a paper on an actual negotiation. And I'm not particularly picky about what the negotiation is. And this was one with a neighbor of his. He and his wife had kind of a dispute with their neighbor. The neighbor had a very old tree, and they were concerned that the tree was going to fall. And if it did fall, given the way it was growing, it was going to crush their garage. So the husband, my student, went to the neighbor, an older woman, and said that he was really concerned about that tree and would she consider cutting it down. She said no. He immediately jumped to the conclusion that she said no because she was worried about cost, because that's what he would be worried about. So he said, well, I'm willing to pay half the price. She said no. He said, look, I'm willing to pay for the whole thing to be cut down. She said no. At that point, he started working on the paper and he began thinking, what are her concerns? And the answers was that he had no idea what her concerns were. So he took a new approach. He apologized for having been so pushy, just started talking to her. And as he talked to her, he didn't even raise the tree issue. She eventually did. She said, that tree was planted by my dad for us kids. And my kids grew up swinging on that tree. And it's my memory. It's my memory of my dad. It's my memory of my husband, who's now passed away. It just horrified me when you said that, you wanted to cut down that tree. And it gave him a completely different perspective. And he said, I was really thoughtless doing that. But I also have kids and I do worry about them. And I think you have grandkids. And I'll tell you what, rather than, I may have jumped to conclusions. So maybe we should start by, could we bring out a tree doctor and have an analysis of the tree? I could be completely wrong on this, and find out if the tree is a healthy tree. I'd be willing to pay for that. And she accepted. Now, I didn't read the rest of the story because that's where his paper ended. But the point was, at that point, she accepted having someone come out to assess the health of the tree. And I'm pretty confident that if it had turned out that it wasn't a healthy tree, she would have accepted having it taken down. But at that point, she was speaking to her concerns about children, rather than his concerns, which were about the cost. So here are just some examples. She's thinking, we can't do that. but it's not a very positive message. So she says, I can see the advantages of that idea, but let's consider some of the possible repercussions. She's not denying that there are advantages, but, and it's not the kind of statement which is, that's a good idea, but it's really ridiculous, which is what a lot of us say. But rather, and I always like to do it with a lot of more language. So it can be, I could see the cost advantages of that idea, but let's look at some of the reputational risks. At this point, you're being very precise about what you agree and what they might think about. I'm not saying what you just said was wrong. I'm saying let's expand it outward. In fact, in terms of a global customer, we did that exactly. I had a client. It was actually, well, I'm not going to say the client's name. It was a big delivery firm, global delivery firm. And they were considering getting a big donation from a major paper manufacturer in Indonesia with a pretty bad reputation for burning down forests. And they wanted to get them as a top customer. But the problem is that they just put out this big announcement about how they're going green. So yes, I can see the financial benefits of doing this, but let's look at the effect that it could have on your going green campaign, so we can do a cost benefit analysis. So I'm not denying what you're saying. I'm just trying to open up the conversation a little bit. He's thinking you have to do this. What he says is, let's go through the pros and cons of the various options. I'm not going to assume that the other party is an idiot. I will start by thinking you're looking at the pros. Let's consider the cons as well. And then I'm going to trust you to make a rational decision. And here's how you reframe conflict into shared problem solving. She said, she's thinking, so do we get the top of the line system you always ask for, or a system we can actually afford? The truth is that you don't want all of one or all of the other. So what she says, and it makes a lot more sense, and it shows respect for the other party, is it seems that IT cares more about after-sales service. While we share that interest, we're primarily concerned with staying within the budget. So let's set our goal at finding a solution that addresses both service and cost. I'm about to go into I'm on the Charter Commission of the City of Portland, and I'm about ready to go into a negotiation over some language that we're putting in our bylaws next week. And I had a certain term. One of the members objected to that term and suggested another one. I'm not happy with the other term, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about what she was trying to accomplish through her word and what I was trying to accomplish through my word. And I will be presenting an alternate word next week that I think is going to accomplish both. And when I do that, I will be explaining, here's what I was trying to get at. Here's what I believe you were trying to get out, but you had concerns about mine. Would this word work? Because I think it gets at what we're both trying to achieve. It's showing respect to the other party and that I took the time to put in some thought. So to conclude, here are 5 tips for communicating the right message. Listen to the other party, learn how they communicate, how they want to communicate, what their priorities are, learn from that, and then you will be far more effective when it comes to talking, to having them listen to you. You want to combine assertiveness, support for what you're trying to achieve, with empathy for the situation they're in, as the people that wrote me that email that I showed earlier did not do. You want to adapt to the way they communicate as far as feels authentic. You don't need to get carried away if it feels artificial to you. You don't need to use slang that the other party uses, but if you can use terminology that is the way that they talk and process, you are better off. You want to use that positive language that I spoke of, and most importantly, don't force your perspective, but speak to theirs. Don't start by saying, we have this great after-school program, but start by saying, what are the kind of issues you care most about? And take it from there. Thank you very much. I know some of you are going to have to depart. For the rest of you, I'm really open to talking a bit more.
Wow, Oh, Melanie, thank you so much. What an incredible session. I feel like I've lived abroad a couple times and I just couldn't stop making connections to situations I'd been to and wishing that I had seen this presentation before doing some of my travels. For those of you who are sticking around, does anyone have some questions to direct Melanie's way?
Not so much a question, but just thank you, Melanie, for the emphasis on understanding the culture of who you're communicating with, who you're dealing with, and putting yourself in their shoes. My background is developing service learning programs over the last 28 years for mainly younger people to have a cultural immersion experience in a developing country. And I've made some huge mistakes along the way, along the area of communication. And one was in Cambodia, which took me a couple of years to figure out. And that is, I put this in the chat, that I was always concerned that I wasn't able to make eye contact with the people in Cambodia. And after years and years, I found out that, as I said, as I put in the chat, Cambodians regard eye contact as a sign of respect, and they will only make eye contact with their social equals. So this gets to your point of establishing trust and relationships before we can really have a significant communication. And then the other thing about the smiles, I like to smile, but I found out after years and years that smiles in Cambodia could mean hello, a simple acknowledgement, but it also is used to hide worries, embarrassment, or anger. And I like to joke around a lot, and I would tell jokes to my Cambodian in-country coordinator, and he'd always smile about it. And I thought, oh, great, he's getting my joke. But I think half the time he was embarrassed or hiding worries about what I was saying. So I really appreciate what you're providing in terms of acknowledging other people and respecting them. And I could tell story upon story about how I didn't understand cultures in certain situations and really pretty much trampled over the culture. So
Well, it sounds like you're actually a pretty sensitive guy, Rick. Let me just add a story about the smile. You do start learning to read the different smiles. Southeast Asians smiles, you are absolutely right, Rick, mean all kinds of different things. Smiling can mean embarrassment. Smiling can mean smiling. And I've lived in I guess about 12 years in Southeast Asia. And one of the hardest days of my life was the day after 9/11. I guess 9/12 it would be, right? And I went in to teach a class of Thai students. I loved my students, and I know they loved me. There was no issue there. And I'd spent the whole night watching 2 airplanes crash, into the Twin Towers. And I walked in the class and the whole class started laughing. And I knew that it was the I am extremely uncomfortable laugh. I knew it was the I don't know what to do, panic laugh. But I had developed enough of a relationship with these students that I was actually able to say to them, I understand that you're laughing because you're all worried about me. But I have to tell you, I can't take it right now. The place I come from, laughing means you're happy. And right now I can't hear that. So I'm going to go out of the room and I'm going to ask you as a favor to me not to laugh. And the little sweethearts did it. But it was just a big cultural difference. But what made it okay is that we could explain to one another, I understand why you're doing this. I understand there's no animus, but I'm asking for a favor. And the students were very generous.
nice story. Thank you, Melanie, so much. I am needing to get on to other things, but I appreciate you sharing. And thanks to GlobalPDX. Do we have any representatives from GlobalPDX here? Maybe some kind of a communication person that set this up.
That's
Thank
me.
you.
Thanks for coming, Rick. It was great to see you.
Thanks again. This is, I think, my second or third PDX event, and it's wonderful. The great speakers you have coming in. I'm really sorry though that you brought someone like Melanie in who had so little international experience. You know, I'd like to talk to somebody that had a little more experience. Congratulations, Melanie. I'd love to talk to you sometime about Korea. It plays a very important part in my family and life experience as well. So.
Oh, I'd love to. Love
Yeah.
to.
So anyhow, thank you very much.
Okay, bye, Rick.
Okay,
Bye,
bye-bye.
Rick. Do we have any other questions out there for Melanie?
I have a quick question. So first of all, thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you, GlobalPDX, for setting this up. Super helpful. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and now I work for a corporate law firm. But I think your tips and the knowledge that you shared is so applicable, both at a global level. And I wish I had known a lot of it before I went into the Peace Corps, but also here in the US and in the business world as well. One of the questions that I have is, sometimes we have the advantage of knowledge, either cultural knowledge, or when we're entering into a meeting, we know the personalities of the people that we're meeting with and how to adapt. But sometimes we don't have that advantage. Do you have any tips or suggestions on when you're going into a meeting with important folks and you have a purpose around the meeting, but you don't necessarily have as much background around their personalities or their culture, about how to kind of read the room and adapt to it?
I think that is a superb question, and it's one that comes up frequently because we're having so many things like Zoom meetings now where it's hard to get to know the other person. One thing that I will say, I always tell clients, is if that person, I've heard from so many clients, like in big organizations, where they maybe have someone big from out of town coming, and then they just go straight into the meeting. If you could get coffee or something with this person ahead of time, please do that. Please try and create some kind of link ahead of time, even if it's fakey, like, we're going to have a Zoom call. Can I call you? Can we speak a little bit in advance so I make sure that we ask the right? It just gives you a chance to learn how they communicate. If it's a whole room, you're basically reaching the most important decision maker, and that's who you're going to be aiming your conversation at, because you can't speak to the whole room. In general, I like to say that if that top person is someone who is very impatient, go for the top line things first, the bullet points first, because the more patient people will kindly wait for you to get around to giving the background, whereas the top line people, you just lose them. In terms of reading the room, if you can enter the room a little early and just hear people do some chit chat, you learn a lot. When I negotiate, of course, I'm watching the temperature of the other person and how long they're willing to put up with it. But I will always try and start with some chit chat at the beginning. What I'm really learning is, are they engaging? Are they answering in just a few words? You can even see that from their emails. Are they the kind of person that writes an email like this, or do they just answer in a few words? Do they answer starting with hi, Melanie, or do they just start answering? All of these are telling me how I need to communicate with that person. When it comes to culture, well, that's a whole conversation in itself. I'm now teaching a class at PSU called Managing Cultural Difference, because culture has so many overlays. I am an American, I'm an Oregonian, I'm a woman of a certain age, of a certain race, and all of those things are having overlays. So I will normally try to start out more in listening mode than talking, and learning as much as I can, so that when I do start talking, I think I have an idea of how that person likes to communicate. But it's a hard question.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Hi,
Yeah, thank you.
Calliope.
Oh, hi, Melanie. I just turned my camera on. This was really wonderful. Thank you so much. I took so many good notes. I had very similar to the question of Kinga around kind of, when you go into unknown situations and how do you diagnose that it's cultural and things aren't happening the way you think they are, but is it because of a particular person or is it because of the environment? And I think your advice is really spot on. And as you were answering, I was also thinking that I do a version of this. And so like, Kinga, if it's a one-on-one meeting and I don't know the other person, I let them speak first. I will ask them a question to get them talking before I, start my spiel or whatever we're there to discuss, so that I can get a sense of the things you mentioned. Are they down to business? How do they think? What's important to them? And then I can respond. And I thought your advice about kind of going into the room early, even the virtual room, and seeing how people are chatting and what the environment is yeah, just really, really spot on. I'd love to hear you share more about what you had begun alluding to, the complexity, how so many different environments are influencing us. Most of us are affiliated with international NGOs, and often maybe I'll go to Kenya, and learn about Kenyan culture, but then I get there and everyone I'm meeting with has, studied abroad in Europe or the United States and is adapting to me instead. If you, have any points on, we're both adapting to each other, we're both sort of working outside of our national cultures, I just love to hear more about it.
Do you mind if I start answering with a little bit of background?
Yeah.
So I've been really interested lately in how we absorb culture, how we develop culture. And it starts making it very clear about these many layers of culture that you're talking about. So for example, I live within, we all live within societies in which we get direct messages. And the direct message in America might be big boys don't cry. It might be, if you're from Asia, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Back to America, this is a free country. Let me use that as an example. This is a free country. You can grow up to be anything. I was certainly given that message many times. It's a very baby boomer message. I don't know if it's as prevalent now as it used to be, but this is a free message. You can grow up to be anything. Well, underneath that are these indirect observed messages. And I am being told as a free country, I can grow up to be anything. And I'm watching TV in which there's not a single lead female character. Even among the cartoon characters when I was growing up, they were all guys: Porky Pig, Donald Duck, Daffy Duck. There were no females. The newscasters were men. The authorities were men. Even in an ad for washing your clothes, the woman would be failing at washing her clothes until a man in a white jacket would come in and tell her what she was doing wrong in washing your clothes. So I'm getting one message, but I'm absorbing another message. And then on top of that are messages that aren't even visualized. They're behavioral messages that I'm absorbing. So the teacher calls on me in class. In Asia, the teacher is not calling on you in class. You are obeying the teacher. But even then, the teacher may call on me in class, but does the teacher call on boys more often than girls? And so it's really hard to understand all the levels of culture that you are dealing with a person. But what I watch for is, back to Kanga's point about smiling, I watch for responses. And I watch very closely. I don't believe anyone can read body language perfectly. I don't think there's any, if they could, police wouldn't have so much trouble. It's not that if you look to the left, you're lying. If you look to the right, you're telling the truth. It's nonsense. But what you can watch is change, and that matters a lot. So you're talking to someone and all at once they smile, they engage, or you're talking to them and you watch them pull away, shut up, kind of look away from you. Looking away from you, by the way, is a very bad sign, unless they're just saying something to the next door neighbor. And so in that case, I'm going to make the assumption that I have said something that offends you. And I will then start either trying to modulate that message, or I will gently try to probe to try and figure out what was going wrong. Now, if it's going well, we just keep up down that road. What I'm more concerned about is where things seem to be turning in a negative direction, or if they're negative, if all at once they start turning in a positive direction. So what I'm watching for constantly, long answer to this, is I never go in feeling that I understand you, but I go in looking for any kind of change in our conversation. And I will go in also with certain sensitivities. I know, for example, we all know that certainly Americans whose families come from another country, that a non-white country, don't really appreciate the opening question of where are you from? You know, we know those things, so we can avoid those things. But if you say something and you see offense, and in fact, I did this the other day. I was walking in Forest Park and I heard some people speaking Indonesian. And I, without even thinking about it, turned to them and said, because it could have been Malay, they're very similar languages. Oh, where are you guys from? And one of the women really bridled and said, I'm from, you know, Boston or something. And I said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put it that way. It's just that I've lived in both Malaysia and Indonesia, and I heard you speaking Bahasa, and I was trying to figure out if you lived anywhere that I've lived. And all at once they said, oh, you speak Bahasa, and the whole thing opened up. But it's also the willingness to admit when you've gone down the wrong road, as we all have.
Melanie, that was a wonderful answer. Thank you.
Melanie, all of this is just so delicious to me. I want to ask you a question that I think maybe some other people might either be thinking or might think when we post this recording later, which is, how does someone get into your career and how does someone train to do what you do? Because it is just fascinating.
I think, like for most careers nowadays, is I like to tell my own students who plan so far ahead in their career, you will bumble into your career. And most careers that you bumble into have not been invented yet. So don't worry about it too much. You know, the way I got involved in my career was my PhD's in history. Although it does show, history probably shows that I had an intense interest in people. But what brought me into my career was curiosity. I was just very interested as we went to different places in noticing, you know, the way the different people react. Maybe going back to that first story about my husband, why it was one thing that with the cigarettes, but why did everyone in Korea think that was as funny as he thought it was? And why did everyone in America think it was as rude as my group thought it was? So just curiosity takes you there. And once you are curious, taking the courses, using opportunities, asking people, being present. Calliope, I'd ask you the same question.
Melanie's only putting me on the spot because I had more, I don't know, I've had other recent career changes. You know, and there's other folks here in the intercultural space, you know, who do this work and who can talk about this. You know, so obviously, as you alluded to, self-awareness is critically important, but the awareness of what kind of work you're finding your passion in and you're enjoying and you're doing well, and the kind of work you don't want to do as well. And then having the self-direction to kind of look at the landscape and say, you know, what does the community need now? What does the industry need? What do organizations need? What do they know that they need, and what do they don't know that they need? And you know, where can I position myself to meet their needs? And in my case, that looked like me going off and starting my own business, which I did 3 years ago, which has been a journey and been wonderful. And I think for the folks who don't want to go that entrepreneurial route, you know, finding roles in an organization where you have some degree of flexibility and autonomy, and that you can see challenges within a department or within your team, and there's opportunity to respond to them, you know. And so looking for an organization that will allow you to, you know, grow and experiment within it, as opposed to something very rigid, I think is a way of learning more about yourself, learning more about the industry, getting to test new skills, and ultimately develop in your role. So
that's a superb answer, Calliope. I would just add one element to that, and that is where they appreciate what you give. So that, I mean, if you're in a role that is always trying to stifle you, then I think that's a good time to leave that role. But if not only are you excited about where they're going, but they feel you are bringing value and you are being listened to some extent, you need to thrive. If you thrive, you're happy. So I'm gonna sign off now, but I really appreciate all you guys coming. I appreciate your questions, and I'm really glad I could connect with a few old friends.
Yeah, and thanks so much to all of you who came today and who stuck around for the full Q&A. As you guys know, we do Lunch and Learns every single month, and if you're a member, they're free. And always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, if you know of a speaker who we should invite to speak in one of our Lunch and Learns, or if you just want to learn how to engage more with Global PDX. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
everybody.
Jennifer. Bye.
Good to see you all.